A 29-year-old woman, Ms. Bronson, brings a man, Mr. Roberts, whom she has known all her life to be her father, to Judge Lauren's courtroom. Mr. Roberts claims that he has reasons to believe that he's not her real father, that another man, Mr. Banks, who is also present in the courtroom, is her real father.
Ms. Bronson, you have always known the defendant to be your biological father, but have opened your case against him to prove paternity because he now claims he has reason to deny he is your father. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Bronson said she believed Mr. Roberts is her father. She said he's the only father she has known for the past 29 years. Mr. Roberts said he has raised Ms. Bronson as his own daughter. He said he didn't know anything about Mr. Banks throughout that time. He said he has been there for her, paid all the child support that was required of him. He noted that his name wasn't on the birth certificate.
Your Honor, I feel Mr. Roberts is my father. He's the only father I've known for 29 years. That's my father. Period. I know him my whole life. He the only one I call my father. That's who I grew up known as my father. So Mr. Roberts is my biological father. That's it.
Ms. Bronson said she has had no reason to doubt that Mr. Roberts was her real father until 2009. She said she got a phone call from her mother. That was when her mother introduced her to Mr. Banks. She told her it was the other man that could also be her real father. Ms. Bronson said she exchanged contact with Mr. Banks, that the whole details of how they started talking with each other is a little bit fuzzy.
Yes, Your Honor, up until 2009.
What happened in 2009?
I had a phone conversation with my mother. Then she mentioned Mr. Banks, and she said, "Don't you remember the guy that I told you who thought he was your father?"
Ms. Bronson said she kept the whole ordeal with Mr. Banks to herself. She didn't tell Mr. Roberts, but she eventually opened up to Ms. Blair. Ms. Blair was Mr. Roberts' fiancée. She said she had a good relationship with Ms. Blair. That's why she was able to confide in her at the time.
So all of a sudden, a man named Mr. Banks comes to the picture, and this man could be your father.
Yes, Your Honor.
Did you say anything to Mr. Roberts? Because at the time, you believed he was your biological father.
No, Your Honor, I didn't say anything to Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Roberts said he found out through Ms. Blair. He said he was kept in the dark about the whole ordeal. He said he also spent 8 months in jail for unpaid child support. Some members of the audience exclaimed. He said he's $75,000 in arrears. He said shortly after Ms. Blair broke the news to him that there's a possibility that Ms. Bronson is not her biological daughter.
Take me to the day you found this out.
A few years ago, Miss Blair told me that she needed to talk to me about something, and that's when I found out. I was kept in the dark about all this.
Mr. Roberts said he was bewildered when he heard the news. Mr. Banks, on the other hand, said he was told he could be father of Ms. Bronson when she was around 6 to 7 years old. He said he was invited to a park where Ms. Bronson and her mother were, and he was told that he's the father of Ms. Bronson.
I was not expecting to hear that. It really shook me after all these years. My thing is, if the mother knew or Ms. Banks knew of somebody, why didn't somebody say something? I was the last to know about everything. And if other people knew, they should have said something. We could have dealt with this issue 20 years ago.
Mr. Banks said he believed at the time that Ms. Bronson could be his daughter because of the resemblance between her and some of his family members. Mr. Roberts said he found out when Ms. Bronson was around 19 years old. Ms. Bronson interrupted and said it was not true, that she was 20, going to 21 at the time. She said her mother told her the story of meeting Mr. Banks at the park when she was 7 years old.
Did you believe her?
I believed it, and I said she probably can because resemblance of my family members at that age that she was.
Mr. Roberts, how old was Ms. Bronson when you found out that you potentially could not be her biological father?
I do believe, Your Honor, she was 19.
Mr. Banks said he was not aware that Mr. Roberts existed. He said he wasn't aware he was paying child support and going to jail for it either. He said Ms. Bronson's mother only mentioned that the man she had married at the time could be the father. Mr. Roberts said he didn't know anything about Mr. Banks. He said he married Ms. Bronson's mother 2 months after she was born.
She said, well, she could be a possibility because she resembled my sister when she was young a little bit.
And you don't remember that either, Miss Bronson?
No, Your Honor, I don't remember that at all.
And so, Mr. Banks, did you know Mr. Roberts existed and that he had been paying child support and going to jail and fighting through all of this responsibility?
No, I didn't.
Mr. Roberts said if he had known then that Mr. Banks was in the picture, he would have discontinued the relationship. Ms. Bronson said she attended Thanksgiving at Mr. Banks' mother's house in 2011, and she didn't tell Mr. Roberts. She said she didn't feel comfortable telling him that it wasn't her job as a daughter to do that. Only DNA results can reveal who the real father is.
Mr. Roberts, you are not the father.
Still my daughter. I love you. You always gonna be my daughter.
The next result reads, Mr. Banks, you are the father. Do you want to be a part of her life?
Yes, I do.
Ms. Miller has summoned Mr. White to Judge Lauren's courtroom to prove he's not her biological father, even though Mr. White has played the role of her father all her life. The man she claims is her biological father is outside the courtroom waiting to be called. Mr. White said Ms. Miller revealed to him just 2 weeks ago that he's not her real father. He believes he's the real father and he will prove it.
Ms. Miller, you've summoned the defendant, Mr. White, to court to prove to him that he is not your biological father, even though he has believed he's your father your entire life.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Miller said she spent time with both men simultaneously while growing up, that she called both of them dad while growing up. She said her mother told her then that the other man, Mr. Wright, had a higher possibility of being her real father. She said she knew this since she was a teenager. She said both men were oblivious of each other up until 2 weeks ago.
I was raised around both men, but mainly around Mr. Wright. I spent most time with Mr. Wright. I used to go over to his house twice out the month, and I hardly spent any time with Mr. White.
Ms. Miller said she felt selfish because she didn't tell either of them. She said she had to build up the nerve to call them and disclose the information. She said when she broke the news, Mr. White went radio silent. She said because her mother told her that she doesn't really know who her real father is. She said she had been living a lie for 30 years, that she was told she had 2 fathers.
Well, like I said before, I felt selfish because I didn't tell either of them, but I had to build up the nerve to actually call them, and I addressed both of them. Hey, Dad. And I took a deep breath and I was like, I want you to prove that you're my dad.
Mr. White said that in the 30 years he had known Ms. Miller, he was never aware that she was also calling another man dad. He said when he got the phone call from Ms. Miller 2 weeks ago, he wondered where she got the information from after over 30 years. He said somebody could have told him long ago, but nobody did. The entire courtroom started clapping.
Mr. White, Ms. Miller's 30 years old. You weren't aware all of these years that she was calling another man dad as well?
Nope, I don't even know who he is.
So the entire relationship, this is their little girl. This is your daughter.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. White said he was with Ms. Miller's mom when she was born. He was with her every other night, even 8 years after she was born. He said he's still trying to figure out when and how Mr. Wright got into the picture. He said they lived together as a family until Ms. Miller was 8 years old. Ms. Miller said she can't recall living with Mr. White as a family, that her memory from there is guarded.
How did he get in the Miller?
And you still have no real information.
I still don't believe.
You've never seen this other man.
I know not as I know about him.
Ms. Miller said her mom kept both men apart, that she knew that when she visited either of them, she wasn't allowed to mention the other one. She said she wasn't told, that it was an unwritten rule, that she picked up on cues from what her mom did. Even the judge was baffled on how the mother was able to handle both men without them ever clashing with each other.
That they were kept apart. How did you manage that? I mean, you had things at school, did you not?
No, well,
how did that happen that they weren't both there?
I think he probably wasn't invited to anything because she was dating him or he wasn't, and vice versa. I think that
Ms. Miller said she didn't really call Mr. White from time to time because she didn't have his phone number. With glistened eyes, she apologized to Mr. White. She said during that time she kept convincing herself that Mr. Wright is her real father, and this development affected her relationship with Mr. White.
What happened on Father's Day? Your mother would just have you call both men?
well, on Father's Day, I never really had Mr. White's number like that. I didn't call him all the time, and he never had my number. I do want to apologize to Mr. White because I knew exactly where he was.
Mr. Wright was invited into the courtroom. He said he had never met Mr. White up until today. He said that he's Ms. Miller's father, that he has been in her life for 30 years. Ms. Miller said she felt like she was living double lives, that this affected her social lives. She said she can't post pictures of events that she partook in, like barbecues at Mr. Wright's family house. She did all these things not to cause any drama.
Have you ever seen or met Mr. White?
No.
You do realize at this point, Mr. Wright, that Mr. White believed over the last 30 years that he is Ms. Miller's biological father.
I'm her father. I've been in her life for 30 years.
Ms. Miller said she loved both men and that she was afraid of the outcome back then. She said she's closer to Mr. Wright's side of the family. Mr. Wright said when he got the call, he was shocked. Ms. Miller said neither of them were on her birth certificate. She said she looked more like Wright's family member. 2 photos were submitted showing resemblances between Ms. Miller and both men. Only the DNA results can resolve this issue.
Ms. Miller's biological father is Mr. White.
Mr. Webb drags Mrs. Forrest, who left him for dead when he was in a coma, to Judge Lauren's courtroom. He claims he's the father of her daughter. Ms. Forrest, alongside her husband, believes that Mr. Webb is not the father, and they want to put an end to all the drama. Mr. Webb said he intends to fight for full custody once he discovers he's the real father. Mr. Forrest said he's the father and that ain't happening.
Mr. Webb, you have been waiting 2 years for this day. You claim the defendant, Mrs. Forrest, left you for dead only to find out once you got out of a coma that she was pregnant and that the baby could be yours or her husband's.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Forrest said she met Mr. Webb when her husband encountered some trouble. She said she started a sexual relationship with Mr. Webb and they were having unprotected sex. Mr. Webb gave a different version of events. He said they were in love at the time, before he went on life support. Ms. Forrest interjected. Mr. Webb said when he got out from the hospital, he got a call that Ms. Forrest was pregnant.
My husband got in some trouble and I ended up meeting Mr. Webb through one of my friends. We hit it off and then I ended up leaving Mr. Forrest for Mr. Webb.
Mr. Webb said Ms. Forrest told him that there was a possibility he's the father of her daughter. Mr. Webb said he was suspicious that Ms. Forrest was seeing other men because of the discrepancies in her clock in time at work and paychecks, that there was missing time that was not accounted for.
Was my child.
She told you a possibility.
Yes, ma'am.
So that means she was admitting that she also had slept with other people.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you think the other person was just her husband?
At the time, no, Your Honor.
Ms. Forrest said that she didn't sleep with anyone else besides her husband and Mr. Webb. Mr. Webb presented a letter he got from his mother when he was on life support. He said at the time that Ms. Forrest had moved into a motel with Mr. Forrest. Mr. Forrest said it happened 3 days after Mr. Webb went into a coma, that Mr. Webb had broken up with Ms. Forrest.
Were you sleeping with anyone else besides Mr. Webb and your husband?
No, Your Honor.
Not during that time.
That's a lie,
But when
Your
you
Honor.
called Mr. Webb and said, I'm pregnant, you did say, and there's a possibility.
Which I didn't get back to with Mr. Forrest until after Travis had done left, or Mr. Webb has done left.
Mr. Webb said Ms. Forrest was in a motel with Mr. Forrest a day after he went on life support. The entire courtroom jeered. Ms. Forrest said they'd already broken up at the time. Mr. Forrest said he had been talking with Ms. Forrest about getting back together before then. Ms. Forrest said she tried to see Mr. Webb when he was on life support, but his mother didn't allow her.
I had ended up on life support.
So this is a statement from your mom?
That is a statement from my mom. And he was there the very next morning in a motel with her.
Is that true?
We were already broke up. We've done called it quits. We done called it everything.
Me and my wife had
a lie,
already
Your
been
Honor.
started talking back.
Mr. Webb recounted again that Ms. Forrest called him after he got out of the hospital that she was pregnant, and there was a possibility that he could be the father. He said this happened in August. Mr. and Mrs. Forrest refuted this, and both said they found out about the pregnancy in September.
Which I loved Mr. Webb at the time, but we were...
You loved him?
Well, I mean,
So when you
My
realized you
feelings
were
that-
pregnant, when exactly did you realize you were pregnant?
The middle of September,
That is
All
lie,
right.
Your Honor.
because I didn't know at the time I was pregnant.
Mr. Forrest said Ms. Forrest had earlier told him that there was a chance he was not the father. Ms. Forrest said she's now sure that Mr. Forrest was the father because she calculated the time she gave birth and counted the weeks backwards, and it ended during the period she was only having sex with Mr. Forrest.
There's
not
a
true.
month discrepancy. You say September, you say August.
Yes, Your Honor.
So when you got the news, did you immediately think you're the father?
Well, she had told me ahead of time that I may not be the father, but there was a chance that I was the father.
Mr. Webb said he had not been able to see the daughter since she was born. Ms. Forrest said they've set up multiple dates for that, on Mr. Webb's term. Mr. Webb said he used his last $80 to put gas inside his car, drove all the way from Illinois, but Ms. Forrest had changed her phone numbers and blocked him on Facebook. He said Ms. Forrest has blocked every channel of communication.
But he
Who's
wasn't
on the birth certificate?
my
I
husband.
am.
is.
Of course.
You are. Well, yes, and you would be presumed to be the father anyway. A child born to a marriage, into a marriage, the husband is presumed to be the father.
I've took care of her since the day she was born.
Ms. Forrest said she was afraid that if Mr. Webb sees her daughter, he could run away with her and she wouldn't be able to get her back. Mr. Forrest said when Ms. Forrest contacted Mr. Webb about the child, he said he didn't care. Mr. Webb, with tears in his eyes, said it was a lie. Mr. Forrest said he will fight Mr. Webb for full custody of his daughter. Only the DNA results can settle this issue.
That her biological father is Mr. Webb. Be clear, you did not just cheat him. You cheated her.
Ms. Whittier brings Mr. Reed to court. She claims that Mr. Reed is the father of her 22-month-old son. She said the doubts surrounding paternity have led to constant fighting in their relationship. She wants to prove he's the real father and save her family from falling apart. Mr. Reed said it is medically impossible for him to be the real father of the child. He said he's haunted with doubts every time he sees the child.
Ms. Whittier, you say that you are sure Mr. Reed is the father of your 22-month-old son, Lukas. But the defendant's paternity doubts have led to constant fighting and tension in your relationship. You desperately hope to prove he is the father to save your family. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Whittier said if not for the doubts concerning the paternity of her child, that she and Mr. Reed would be married. She said everything started when they were arguing one day, and she told Mr. Reed that how sure was he that the child is even his. She said it to end the argument, that she never doubted it, that she has regretted it ever since.
Where do you think the two of you would be right now?
I think we would be married, moving on with our lives, getting away from the conflict that constantly drags our family down.
Really? And that conflict is all based upon a paternity issue.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Whittier said she met Mr. Reed when he tried to save her toddler, whom he thought was drowning. Mr. Reed narrated the whole ordeal in a funny way, and Ms. Whittier giggled all through the entirety of it. Mr. Reed said the toddler was adorable and that he loved her. Judge Lauren even commented that it was cute.
He tried to save my toddler that he thought was drowning. He didn't realize she could swim.
Oh, that's cute. Good reflexes, Mr. Reed.
It was a baby, and she was adorable, cute little stubby thing running around the pool in a little swimmer diaper.
Ms. Whittier said they had dinner together that same night, and they didn't see each other till about a week later. She said she called him, and they end up spending the next month together. She said Mr. Reed left. He returned to Tennessee. She said it broke her heart and her daughter's heart. She said he was gone for about 6 weeks.
And so after that, you obviously introduced yourself to your real-life superhero.
Yes, we had dinner later that night and didn't see each other for about a week. And finally, I decided, well, give him a call.
Ms. Whittier said she went to get Mr. Reed after they started missing each other. Mr. Reed said he also packed his things and went down to Georgia. They built a home for themselves there. Ms. Whittier said he moved in mid-September, and she got pregnant in the first week of November. Mr. Reed said he had no doubt then that the child was his.
I don't want it to turn bad. And so you went to get him.
We did. I was there before the sun come up.
So you packed up and jumped in the car.
We jumped in the car and I headed to Georgia.
And you headed to Georgia? And so you all made a home there?
We did.
We did.
Ms. Whittier said the conflict started when Mr. Reed's ex-girlfriend started telling him that what if the pregnancy is not his? Ms. Whittier said this led to some arguments, and coincidentally at the time, her ex-boyfriend sent some vulgar text messages to her. Mr. Reed found them, and he thought there was something going on between both of them. Mr. Reed said he moved in with his ex during the time of the pregnancy.
When did the plot twist come?
With his ex-girlfriend.
Okay.
The conflict started between me and her. Well, then she starts whispering in his ear, oh, well, what if it's not yours? There was some arguments.
There were some arguments?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mr. Reed said that Ms. Whittier's ex sent a sex video to her phone. It contained two people having sex. He thought at first that it was Ms. Whittier and the ex in the video. He said he later became more disgruntled as to why Ms. Whittier was still in communication with her ex. Ms. Whittier said Mr. Reed moved in with his ex after seeing the video, who then tried to convince him that the pregnancy is not his.
I told her, I was like, why are you, I don't mind if you talk to him, but if he's gonna send you videos like this, I told her, no, that's not okay.
Okay, that's fair.
I mean.
Did you believe it was the ex and Ms. Whittier in the video?
I think that's what he thought, and I
didn't
tried.
think it was.
Ms. Whittier said she had some health complications which led to a blood clot, and she was told that her baby may not survive. She called Mr. Reed and told him. Mr. Reed said he went to meet her, and he was there for her despite the doubts he had concerning the pregnancy. The doctors told them the child might have some health complications.
And I told him that I didn't know if Lukas was gonna make it. I didn't know if I was gonna make it.
And so when you got that call, Mr. What did you do?
All I could do not to cry too, but I knew as a man that I needed to be strong, and I needed to be her rock.
Ms. Whittier said Mr. Reed's ex came back and was telling him that the child couldn't be his, that there was no medical history in his family. Mr. Reed said he was not on the birth certificate and that Ms. Whittier was still legally married at the time. The whole courtroom was stunned. The doubts fully started when the child started having seizures and brain issues. Only the DNA results can fix the cracks in this family.
Mr. Reed, you are the father.
Ms. Walker comes to court after a near-death experience to find out who her real father is. She said after believing that one man was her father, she recently learnt about the possibility of another man, Bruce Simmons. Mrs. Simmons was also present in the courtroom, and she's adamant that there's no way her husband is the father of Ms. Walker.
Ms. Walker, you claim that your near-death experience has made your desire to determine your biological father more important than ever.
Yes, Your Honor.
After believing one man was your father, you learned about another possibility, Bruce Simmons.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mrs. Simmons said she had been with Mr. Simmons since they were 15 years old. She has 2 biological kids. They never had any kids together. She believed that her husband was sterile. The entire courtroom echoed the word, wow. She said that if she and her husband couldn't make any babies after that long period of time, that there's no way he could have a child out there. She confirmed that her 2 kids are not his.
Miss Simmons, please share your doubt.
We've been together since we were 15. We just got married 2003. I have 2 biological kids. We never made any. I believe my husband is sterile. I believe he can't make no kids.
Ms. Walker said when she was sick to the point of death that she needed blood for a lung biopsy, so she reached out to the man that she had always thought was her father to come and donate blood for her, instead of using donor blood. She said the doctors later told her that they couldn't use her father's blood because it was not a match.
In the beginning, I was also told that there was another man that was on my birth certificate, and I was told that was my father.
So what made you exclude the man that's on your birth certificate?
I excluded him because I had, as you know, I had a near-death experience. I was going for a congestive heart failure, and I had to have a lung biopsy.
Ms. Walker said her mother went down to Jersey, where she resided as a child. She said she was stopped by Mr. Simmons' sister, and she asked after her niece. Mrs. Simmons said that was not how it happened. Ms. Walker continued. She said her mother came back and told her that she might know who her real father was. She gave her Mr. Simmons' sister's number.
How did you connect to the name Bruce Simmons?
Okay, my mother had to go to Jersey, where I resided when I was a child, and his sister reached out to my mom in the middle of the road, stopped her, hey, I've been looking for my niece.
Ms. Walker said she called her and she told her she knew when she was little before her mother took her away. Mrs. Simmons said that was not how it happened. Mrs. Simmons said the sister called Mr. Simmons and told him that he met Ms. Walker's mother, who was claiming that he's the father of her daughter. Mrs. Simmons said the sister should have asked for permission before giving out her husband's number.
Your mom had you around, and then all of a sudden, she went off.
And this is Bruce Simmons' sister.
Yes.
And that's just not how it happened.
Talking to you.
Yes.
A heated argument broke out between both women. Judge Lauren had to step in. The judge asked Mrs. Simmons which part she was upset about, whether it was Ms. Walker contacting her husband or the possibility that her husband could be her father. Mrs. Simmons said none of that she was upset about the way they went about the whole thing.
Okay, now he's talking to her on the phone. Oh, call this one. Why is you giving out your family numbers to people that you don't even sure that's your daughter yet?
What's it to you?
It's a lot to me. That's my husband.
But I'm not asking y'all for nothing. I don't want nothing. I just want to know.
Ms. Walker said the first message she got from Mr. Simmons said he was her father, that she should call him back. She said she was stunned. She played the message for everyone close to her. She said the hope meant a whole lot to her. She said Mr. Simmons told her he believed he's her father.
Just to have that little bit of hope of where you belong, it means a whole lot.
And so, Ms. Walker, even though you got that message, you have never met Mr. Simmons.
Never.
No.
Now,
To this
I've
day.
seen his sister. I've lived in the same town. You know, he's seen me, from my understanding of what he said, he's seen me as a baby. When I was brought around as a baby.
Mr. Simmons was invited into the courtroom. He hugged Ms. Walker before taking the stand. The entire courtroom clapped. Mr. Simmons said he initially went after Ms. Walker's mother's sister, but it didn't work out. So he ended up hooking up with Ms. Walker's mother instead. He said he spent a weekend with her. They were intimate and no protection was used.
Now she says that you contacted her and said you believe you were her biological father.
Yes.
Now take me back.
Well-
Tell me about the relationship with her mother.
When me and her mother got together, I was trying to get her sister, her mother's sister. That's how it really started out.
Mr. Simmons said he doesn't believe he was sterile. The doctors told him his sperm was weak, but he wasn't sterile. Ms. Walker said her kid has asthma, and Mr. Simmons also has asthma. Mr. Simmons said he had similar medical history with Ms. Walker and her kids. That's one of the major reasons he wants to find out about paternity. Only the DNA results can put this to bed.
Mr. Bruce Simmons, you are not her father.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Fritz appears in court. He claims he has found his long-lost daughter who was taken from him over 30 years ago. He said he found Ms. Agee on Facebook, whom he believed is her daughter. Ms. Agee said she knows who her biological father is, and she will prove once and for all that it's not Mr. Fritz.
Mr. Fritz, you state that over the last 30 years you have searched to find your biological daughter, who you claim was taken from you as a child. However, just 4 months ago, this 3-decade search came to an end when you found Ms. Agee, whom you believe to be your daughter, on Facebook.
Ms. Agee said she's adamant because Mr. Fritz was not on her birth certificate. She said the man on her birth certificate wasn't her biological father. He was just married to her mother at the time. She said she knew who her real father was. She said she started asking questions when she was about 8 years old. She said her grandmother told her that real father was Buster.
Mr. Fritz is not your biological father.
Well, first off, Your Honor, he's not on my birth certificate. The guy that's on my birth certificate was not my biological father. He was married to my mother when I was born, but I do know who my biological father is. I was about 8 or 9 years old. I started asking questions about who my real father was, and my grandmother was the one who raised me.
Ms. Agee said she met Buster. He spent some time with her. He was excited to meet her. He told her he was her father. He didn't see or hear from him till she was about 11 years old. He called and said he wanted to be in her life. He didn't show up either. She said this hurt her very much.
I spent a couple hours with him. He told me he was my dad. You know, he was excited to see me. He was going to be in my life. Well, I didn't see him after that. I think I was 11 years old. He called, and he wanted to be in my life. And I was like, okay, you know, that's fine with me. I had a Christmas play the next day.
Ms. Agee said she tried reaching out to Buster when she was 17. She had her first child and got married, and also when she had her second child when she was 18, that she wanted her kids to have a relationship with their grandfather. She went over to his sister's house and she told him that Buster will contact her. She said she hasn't heard from him since, and she's almost 35 years old.
You know, come to our Christmas play and, you know, want to be part of my life. I said, that's fine. he didn't show up. I was hurt. My biological father wasn't around. He wasn't in my life, so that hurt me.
And you always believed that that man was your biological father?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Fritz said he searched for her for over 30 years. Ms. Agee disagrees. She said if he really looked for her, he would have found her. Mr. Fritz said he was incarcerated before, that when he was transferred to another camp, he told his friend to notify Ms. Agee's family. He said he escaped to go see his daughter when she was 2 months old.
I looked for you for 30 years, Angel.
If you did, you would have found me.
Tell me about this 30-year search and why you strongly believe you are Miss Agee's biological father.
I got sentenced and incarcerated, and when I was being moved from one camp to another, I met a friend of mine. I said, hey man, when you get back in town, would you run by and let Angel's family know that I've been transferred?
Mr. Fritz presented some photos to the court, showing Ms. Agee sitting on his father's lap when she was 2 years old. Ms. Agee said that she was the person in the picture, but she didn't remember the events. Mr. Fritz said she used to come stay with them back then. Ms. Agee said she didn't remember.
I don't.
You acknowledge, Miss Agee, that that's you.
That's me. That's me.
When those pictures were taken, she's about 3 years old. She come down and stay with me, and I was working. And
I don't recall that. I remember my grandmother. I remember staying with my grandmother.
You may not remember it, and you know.
Mr. Fritz said when he went looking for Ms. Agee, their trailer was gone. The neighbors said they've moved, and they didn't know where. He said he went to the courthouse to search for records for anything that might tell him where they went. Ms. Agee said he's lying. She said that the town was a small town and people talked. She said he didn't look hard enough.
And I want to find my kids. I'm going to find them, regardless.
I didn't stop.
Regardless.
Very next move, I went to the courthouse. I went to the courthouse, started searching records. I looked under her family's name. I looked under the name that I knew she was carrying, which was Dial. I looked under that name, and there was nothing in the court records.
Ms. Agee said she's angry at Mr. Fritz because he says he's her biological father. That why wasn't he there when she was growing up, and he's now showing up after 35 years. The judge laid out some legitimate concerns that might have hampered Mr. Fritz's search. The courtroom clapped.
Look for me hard enough to find me when a guy that's supposed to be my biological dad found me.
And do you understand that the circumstances that led to one man finding you there could be a separate set of circumstances that were presented to him in his search? Or maybe there were ways that he could have searched harder or deeper.
Ms. Agee started crying that she has been hurt all her life and she doesn't want to experience it again. Mr. Fritz went over and hugged her. He said he loved her. Mr. Fritz said he doesn't care what the paper says, that he will be there for Ms. Agee. Ms. Agee said she was raised by her grandmother. She didn't have a mother or a father growing up. Only the DNA results can heal their broken hearts.
I am her
Mr.
daddy.
Fritz, you are her father.
Yes!
That's what I'm talking about.